Welcome to the HR Kyle podcast, your go-to source for insightful discussions on leadership, job searching, and all things human resources. I'm your host, HR Kyle, and each week we dive deep into topics relevant to professionals seeking to elevate their careers and organizations. Whether you're a seasoned leader, a job seeker navigating the ever-changing landscape of employment, or an enthusiast looking to stay ahead of the curve, this is the podcast for you. Join me as we explore practical strategies, share expert insights, and engage in meaningful conversations that empower you to succeed in today's dynamic workplace. So, adjust your headphones and let's dive in. Hello and welcome to another edition of the HR Kyle podcast. And as usual, I'm your host, HR Kyle. But we're going to continue on the format that we introduced a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to welcome HR Kyle Becki to the studio yet again to join me as a co-host. So HR Kyle Becki, welcome back.
Thanks, Kyle. Glad to be here as usual.
Great. Well, today's episode is going to be all around the topic of emotional intelligence in the workplace. So as usual, we'll do segment one. Becki and I will talk about this topic from our perspective, sharing our experiences and so on. And then in segment two, we'll welcome a guest to the studio, and he will share all of his knowledge and experience around it as well, being an expert in the topic of emotional intelligence. However, before we get to that, let's get to this. And this is a quick break to talk to you more about HR Kyle. We'll be right back. Greetings, I'm Kyle Smith, and I'm here to offer you a speaking experience that goes beyond the ordinary. With a rich background in leadership, HR, and personal development, I bring a unique blend of expertise and passion to every presentation. Whether it's Leadership Unleashed, well-being at work, or career mastery, I delve into topics that empower individuals and organizations to reach their fullest potential. What sets me apart? Proven expertise, an engaging delivery style, and actionable insights that drive positive change. But here's the kicker. I don't just offer a one-size-fits-all approach. I customize my content to meet the specific needs and goals of your event. So let's elevate your event together. Contact me now to reserve your date and unlock the full potential of your audience and organization. Don't miss out on the opportunity to inspire greatness. Visit hrkyle.com today. And we're back. I hope you enjoyed that brief break, learning more about some of the things that we're up to and how we can provide services to you. And again, today's topic is about emotional intelligence in the workplace. And Becki has, again, joined me for this episode. We're going to stick with this format because, one, it works really well, and two, you all seem to really enjoy it also. So, Becki, welcome back.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm really looking forward to this topic. It sounds very interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing your ideas.
Well, Becki, you've prepared some questions, I know, in advance for us to talk about, so I'll turn the studio host role over to you.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to start off with emotional intelligence and how it impacts leadership effectiveness and the team dynamics in the workplace. What are your thoughts?
Well, I've got a saying, and I think I published it at some point out on LinkedIn, that leaders are only as effective as their message is received. So think about that again. Leaders are only as effective as their messages are received. And when you think about that and what that really means, it means that you have to be able to deliver a message that resonates with your audience. In this case, your audience as a leader is your team, the team that you're leading. So you're crafting that message and you're delivering it in such a way that it resonates with the team, that they understand what it means. It motivates them. It drives them to want to work together to achieve the goal that ideally the message is pushing us all towards. So the only way that can really be accomplished to its fullest extent is, one, if you understand the perceptions, the interpretations, the emotions that your team is going to have around different topics, around different subjects, up to and including how messages are delivered. So having that understanding, taking the time to do that sort of evaluation around your team is the most effective way to make sure that you're crafting and delivering a message that resonates with them.
Yeah, and that's great. And the idea, again, that I really pulled out from there is knowing your audience, knowing your team. I've worked at multiple jobs where my leadership did not know my degrees, didn't know what I had been trained in. So I couldn't progress in the company because of that.
And I guarantee you there's more than a few people that are listening right now that are nodding their heads emphatically to what you just said, because I think that's a common issue in the workplace for whatever reason. Again, we could spend a whole episode on the reasons why it occurs, but what we're talking about today is we need to overcome that. As leaders, we need to be plugged in to our team and setting them up for success, because that's what sets us as a team up for success.
So I probably know the answer to this, but what are your thoughts? Because I often thought it's not my place to tell my boss what I can do and can't do. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think any sort of relationship is like a dance. And at one point or another, one person or the other is leading that dance, or they're taking the first step, or they're directing it in such a way. So I think and I believe that it's okay to a degree for that employee to speak up and say, boss, the way you're delivering this message, or the things that we're talking about here, they do play into my strengths. You mentioned that these are some of the things that we're working on. Well, if you consider my background and some of the things I've done this kind of work in the past. So, Becki, I would contend that you as an employee, you have to speak up, because if the boss is missing this, and again, there could be any number of reasons. They're not high in emotional intelligence. They've forgotten about it. They're too busy. Any number of reasons. But when those things occur, I think you as an employee, to maintain your health and your well-being and your enthusiasm about your job, I think you have to speak up.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that really leads into that emotional intelligence part that we were talking about. Can you provide examples of how high emotional intelligence can improve conflict resolution and the communication within the teams?
Absolutely. So if you get to the heart of emotional intelligence, it's really the ability on that person's part to perceive, interpret, demonstrate, control, evaluate, and use emotions to communicate with and relate to others, and to do it in such a way that's effective and constructive. The biggest, one of the biggest, but it's sure significant. One of the biggest reasons for conflict is miscommunication. Whether the message wasn't received, the message wasn't delivered, the message wasn't understood, there's some sort of a disconnect from a communication standpoint. Those with higher emotional intelligence, whether you're on the delivery end or the receiving end of that message, you're in a better position to understand that there is a disconnect. And a lot of times that's one of the biggest things in conflict resolution, to catch that conflict before it has a chance to get out of control. It's like being out in the forest and you go camping. If you put out your fire when you're done camping, great, nothing happens. But if you enable that campfire to sit for a little bit and smolder, pretty soon it grows and grows and grows, and after a while you've got a forest fire on your hands. Well, conflict's the same way. Try to catch it when you're sitting at the campfire and you're all done and you're ready to put the fire out. Catch it early before it has a chance to spread. And that's what emotional intelligence allows us to do. It allows us to be in those situations where the conflict is just starting to smolder a little bit. We recognize it and we understand the audience and the people that are around us well enough to be able to communicate in such a way that, again, I keep using this term, but it resonates with them. And what that means is they're able to take it to heart. They understand what you're saying. So a big part of conflict resolution is catching it before it really has a chance to take off. And one of the biggest causes of conflict is miscommunication in some way, shape, or form.
Great points, but obviously, and unfortunately, many employees are afraid to catch that before it gets too big. So what are your thoughts on and ideas about what an employee should do so it doesn't get blown out of proportion and get miscommunicated?
Well, that's a great question. And a big part of emotional intelligence and how you know that you're progressing and you're getting better at it is when you understand your emotions, where and how they're triggered, and you develop strategies to get around that. Because think about what you just said. You said that the employee, recognizes there's an issue or there's a problem, but they're afraid to say something. Well, why would they be afraid? So that's something they need to explore, because I don't know of anybody out there that says, gosh, I love conflict. Let's have more conflict.
Right.
So the thought that they would rather go through conflict than to communicate with that other person to avoid it, I think that's something that tells you that they need to work further on their emotional intelligence and what we call EQ.
Right, very interesting. And another point that I think of in our technological age today is being careful with emails and texting because of the miscommunication.
Yes. Well, the big thing there is, those are just words. Wherever you're typing something and there's not a chance for delivery, there's always a chance for misinterpretation, because again, it's just words on a piece of paper. It doesn't have inflection. It doesn't have any sort of delivery. You're not able to read all the nonverbals, which we as humans, we place a lot more value on nonverbal communication when messages are delivered than the actual words. So you're losing all that, and all you have is the words. And you've got the person who's on the other side that's receiving it, and you don't know where their mind and their heart and their soul is at the point that they're receiving it. Maybe they're already having a bad day, and that message looks like it's just another way to pile on. Or maybe they're used to being spoken down to so frequently that every time they get a message, their first inclination is that it must be negative.
Right, right. So your suggestion is that when there is an issue, to touch base one-on-one, face-to-face with your
Absolutely.
employer?
Yeah. Issues cannot and should not be resolved by email or any sort of electronic communication. The whole purpose of electronic communication is simply to deliver facts. It's not to work with anything that relates to emotion. And let's face it, differences of opinion, issues, anything like that. The biggest factor there is emotion. It's not facts. It's about the emotion. So you certainly can't resolve something that's emotional based through a mechanism that's strictly fact based.
That's an excellent point. Excellent. What are some signs, some common signs that indicate a lack of emotional intelligence in team leaders? I'm
Yeah.
sorry, team members. And how can the leaders address those issues?
Well, I think there's a few things, and I've seen them so many times. One, groups that tend to just seem to always have a little bit of bickering and a little bit of cliques that happen. You'll have a group of 10 or 12 people, and you see them, and they always kind of break up into 2 or 3 different subgroups. So that right off the bat, that tells you that there's a lack here of emotional intelligence. The other thing is where you've got members of your team that are afraid to speak up in meetings. They'll come to you as a leader afterwards and say, they'll have all these great ideas and thoughts, and you ask them, well, why didn't you bring it up in the meeting? And you don't even need to ask why. It's because there's a lack of emotional intelligence. There's something going on in that dynamic that's making them certainly concerned. So those are two right off the top that I've seen so many times, to where you don't have people speaking up, you don't have things being brought up, you have your little cliques that take place. And in those circumstances, each and every time, it ultimately traces back to issues with emotional intelligence within your team. So how can leaders address those? Directly. That's the best way. Bring it out in the meeting. Let the team know what you're observing. And again, this isn't calling anyone out. This isn't jumping to any conclusions. You're calling out what you're seeing. You're describing what you're seeing, and you're letting them know how it's adversely affecting the group. So, it's adversely affecting perceptions, interpretations, demonstration, and control, and so on. By not having these things brought out and discussed, and ultimately that's not a successful team. Those type of dynamics affect a team's ability to reach their goals and really their greatest potential as both a group and as individuals.
Right. Excellent points again. Well, you're just right on target today with all these answers.
I'm
Good
glad
for
to hear you say that. Hopefully the thousands of people that are listening right now feel the same way.
I agree. I'm sure there's some head spinning and ideas going on right now. Final question. How can organizations incorporate emotional intelligence training into their development programs so that the overall workplace culture and employee satisfaction is high?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, they have to. They need to. There's not an organization out there that any of us are a part of that doesn't need focus and attention to emotional intelligence. Humans are emotional beings. Period. End of discussion. I don't care if it's a scientist, it's someone that's heavily rooted into a field that you would think has little to no emotion with it. I guarantee you there's emotional factors at play in those group dynamics. Right. So that's first and foremost. The second thing is have training that specifically speaks to emotional intelligence. Help people to understand what it is, how they can interpret it for themselves, and how important that it is. And when I say about important, speak to facts, speak to the impact to the bottom line, speak to how it does affect productivity and collaboration and how it reduces turnover and absenteeism. So get that data and speak to those facts. So direct emotional intelligence training, absolutely, but also incorporate it into your other training. Incorporate it into your training that involves your individual employees and incorporate it into training that involves some of the group training because it has an application in all different kinds of areas, not the least of which organizations that like to do assessments, for example, maybe it's Myers-Briggs or it's some other assessment that they do. Well, that's fertile ground to incorporate concepts of emotional intelligence there because, how we think, how we function, those things all relate in some way, shape, or form to our emotional intelligence.
Right. Can you give me a specific example of something, how you would incorporate emotional intelligence training into your workplace or that you have done in the past?
Yeah, one of the ways I've done it is with the leadership training. And I have a particular leadership training that I like to do called The Qualities of an Effective Leader. And the way I incorporate emotional intelligence there is so much of the qualities of an ineffective leader and how that impacts teams and individuals and so on is really based around these concepts of emotional intelligence. So we talk about the emotional reactions that ineffective leaders have upon teams and how the impact that they have upon individuals. So that right there immediately comes to mind to where there's such a combination of all these concepts when we talk about leadership effectiveness.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you once again for including me. And as usual, just a great conversation. And I always enjoy this.
Well, first off, I'm happy to include you. Secondly, I don't know if I have a choice at this point because we live together.
Yep.
And then thirdly, probably the most important thing, I'm getting a lot of positive response about you joining the episodes and talking with me and us talking through these topics. So I don't think we have a choice, either one of us. I think we've got to continue on this format for a little bit longer.
I agree.
And I'm enjoying it too. I'm glad we're able to do this together.
Yes.
Well, folks, that's the end of segment one. We hope you enjoyed our discussion around the topic of emotional intelligence in the workplace. We're going to take a little break right now. And when we come back, we're going to welcome a guest into the studio who's an expert on the topic of emotional intelligence. He's spoken to audience really around the world, and he's written on the topic as well. So we're excited to have him come join us. But first, let's take a little break. Are you a business owner looking to build a thriving team? Or perhaps a job seeker on a quest for your dream career? Look no further than HR Kyle. HR Kyle is your trusted partner for all things human resources. We're not just about services, we're about success. For businesses, HR Kyle offers tailored HR solutions from talent acquisition to compliance support. We're here to help your team flourish. And for the job seekers, HR Kyle provides personalized career guidance and direction that only a seasoned HR professional can offer. We'll help you find that perfect job match. Don't settle for less. Choose HR Kyle and unlock success today. Visit us at www.hrkyle.com. HR Kyle, unlocking potential, empowering careers, transforming business.
Are you striving to lead your team to success? Or perhaps you're navigating the complexities of the job market. Introducing The Solution, the HR Kyle YouTube channel. Your go-to source for insightful guidance and practical tips. With short 1 to 2 minute clips, our videos save you time while delivering impactful, usable strategies. From effective leadership techniques to mastering the job application process, access valuable advice in minutes. Don't miss out. Subscribe to the HR Kyle channel on YouTube today.
Hello and welcome to segment 2 of the HR Kyle podcast. I hope you enjoyed that brief break. Again, I'm your host, HR Kyle. Now, tonight's theme is emotional intelligence and the importance of that as both leaders as well as just any employee throughout an organization. And we're fortunate to have a man join us tonight, Javon Wooden. And Javon is a recognized expert around the world on this topic of emotional intelligence. So we're very fortunate to have him join us tonight, share his perspective, share his background, and really draw a stronger light on this topic of emotional intelligence. So Javon, welcome to the HR Kyle podcast.
Hey, Kyle, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor.
Nope. It's a pleasure having you here tonight. So, Javon, we'll start off. Tell us a little bit about yourself and just some of your career experiences and really what's brought you to this point.
Sure. So I spent 12 years in the Army. So as you can imagine, you get to see what the power of emotional intelligence is at the highest level when it comes to literally life and death situations. And then I spent time in the corporate side as well within tech. Tech is not known to be a very emotionally intelligent or empathetic field. So I got to see what it looked like, how impactful it was, whether to the success and the failure of a mission, of a project, of an organization.
Well, Javon, first off, we appreciate your military service. I've made no secret that I'm a huge fan and supporter of the military and do a lot of things offline and as part of my business operation in support of the military. So first off, we appreciate that. My dad was in the Army for 12 years as well. So we certainly appreciate that. The other thing that I love about your background, and one of the reasons I was excited for having you on, is you've made emotional intelligence a topic of your career. So meaning you didn't have this career and then all of a sudden just to land in this topic of wanting to focus on emotional intelligence. It's something that you've built up a knowledge base over time. And now you're taking that knowledge and you're spreading it to organizations really throughout the world.
Yes, sir.
So with that in mind, how did you first become interested in this topic of emotional intelligence? And really, what are the key experiences or insights that made you realize it's really, really important from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I want to go back to your dad serving. I want to say thanks to him and also thank you to your family for leading because the family served too.
Yes, you do.
So
Very true.
Absolutely. So for me, the journey of focusing and honing in on emotional intelligence really started when I started to do some introspection. When I was younger, I really lacked emotional intelligence, especially the social side. And it caused me to be very, I lacked confidence. I wasn't really conscious of my emotions. I couldn't put a name to what I was feeling, why I was feeling, if it matched the situation or the environment I was in. Because I was really in a state of survival and I was in a state of a fixed mindset. So when I look back at that, as I went through the process of healing and recovering from everything, all the traumas experienced through life and in the military, I said, you know what? If I'm feeling this, then I'm sure there's a bunch of other people feeling it. Then I just started doing a bunch of research. I didn't really know that there was 4 quadrants or 4 pieces to being emotionally intelligent. Not only do you have the self-recognition and the self-management side of the things that I was just talking about, but also the part of the relationships, right? Being able to see what people were feeling, being empathetic, being socially aware. All these things tie into emotional intelligence. So when I looked and I initially started my business, I knew I was missing something. I was initially focusing on mindset. But as I was coaching leaders and coming into organizations, I noticed that the thing was a lack of empathy. And then empathy is a portion of the social recognition aspect of emotional intelligence. So it just really all came around full circle, Kyle. And I realized that it ties into whether you're on a sales team, ties in whether you're a CEO, whether you're working as the cleaning crew. Everyone is impacted by whether you're emotionally intelligent as a leader or not.
Amen to all that. And you're exactly right. I mean, it's having that impact on the total team dynamics. And something else that you hit on, Javon, that I want to come back to for just a moment, because I think it often gets overlooked in this topic. And that is how your understanding, appreciation, and really self-reflection around emotional intelligence boosted your confidence. And it sounds like that's something that you build into your practice as well as you work with organizations, that emotional intelligence isn't just about being a leader and building a positive team dynamic, but it really builds up that confidence level.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. As I mentioned, there's 4 pieces and 2 of those pieces tie into you, right? Knowing yourself, being aware of your strengths. And when I say strengths, it's not only what you're good at, but what fuels you, what really inspires you to keep going, what motivates you, right? If you lack any portion of this stuff, it's going to show up and manifest in some type of way. So you really have to be willing to do the work. And when I say do the work, some of the hardest work to do is the personal work, the work on the internal, because we don't readily see what's taking place, right? It's not a tangible thing. But if you really, really start to pay attention and you really build up your self-recognition part of your emotional intelligence, you will see how differently it impacts you. If you used to get angry when someone said the wrong thing, you start to see patterns, right? You start to recognize the behavioral patterns, and then you're able to control yourself. You're able to respond versus react. And that's why it really comes into play. And it also ties into your interactions with others. If you maintain and manage yourself, right, then you won't, if someone says something you don't like, you will be more curious. You will identify, why did you say that? Or what was your thought process behind that versus being ready to just jump down someone's throat, right? So it's a it's just a holistic way of looking at yourself and how you interact with others. And when I say emotions, a lot of people think of just feelings. But feelings, if you think about where emotions lead to, it leads to compassion. You can't have a compassionate leadership or compassionate culture if you can't even understand who you're being compassionate towards.
Wow. Yeah, that's some real wisdom. And I know as we're having this conversation, I can hear the heads nodding in my audience group here that are looking to build and develop their leadership skills. And that's precisely what you're talking about with this. Now, Javon, you've given us a little bit of a look inside your process, but can you describe a little bit more how you developed your emotional intelligence skills and really how you apply these in your work day to day with the leaders and teams that you work with?
Absolutely. Well, for me to develop mine personally, I had to, as I said, I did the hard work. I started taking what I like to call, my Jocko Willink coined this phrase. He's a Navy SEAL. Extreme ownership. What part did I play in what was going on? And this really all started back in the military. When I used to lead soldiers, and we would go out on missions or something, we had to do something, I would look back and reassess how everything played out. And then I would go and get feedback. Feedback is a very important part if you want to, bolster your emotional intelligence. You have to get feedback. how do others see you? Is it the same way you see yourself? Oftentimes you'll find that it might be a little different picture. So I had to do all of that, and I had to be willing and open to listening to that. And I didn't call it criticism. I call it feedback, right? Because oftentimes as leaders, it hurts our egos a little bit to hear that we have work to do. So that was a really big piece for me. And then another thing I started to do was I did the pattern recognition piece. I would look back if something happened in that day. I started to journal at the end of my day. What happened? And then I would rate it from 1 to 10. How was that day? 1 being a horrible day, and then 10 being the best day of my life. And I would look at if there was any one event that happened and it felt like my day was bad, I would find that one event and I'll say, you know what? Out of all things, my day really wasn't bad. It was the fact that I was targeting one negative thing that happened in my whole day. And I allowed that to control things. So I started really taking ownership of all of this stuff. And then I just implemented in my daily interactions and my daily intentions and everything I did. And it's a practice. It's just like yoga. You don't always get it right on every play, but that's where you learn, right? You take what you learn and you apply it to be better the next time. And when I come into organizations, I do the same. If I'm looking at a process, change management, I'll say, okay, what's going on? What's working well for them? What's some of the feedback they got from their people? Have they even gotten feedback or do they make decisions in a vacuum? What's the dynamics of the leadership teams? There's so many questions I can come in and ask before I even really start to get to the work, because I want to come in curious, and then I want to come in and cultivate and work with them to create a plan of action that really aligns with their values. Because oftentimes we lose what the values even mean. We're so focused and rightfully so on making money in the bottom lines that we forget that the people are what drive that bottom line. So I look at how they're taking care of those people. Are the people in the right places and spaces? And do they have the proper resources to perform these goals and these tasks? And then I say, okay, how do we make this change easy? Because it's going to take some work and we got to have some evangelists for this. And then we get to going.
Love it. And something that's coming through loud and clear, and as I read some of your work and did a little bit of my background, and it's coming through here as well. What I love about your approach is it's not about the emotions. It's not about putting labels on things. It's, as you said, it's a very non-threatening approach that's based around a curiosity to say, let me understand this person, let me understand this situation, and let me, as you said, work on getting better. And that's something that, again, it's coming through loud and clear here as well, that it's just a very non-threatening, positive approach to the situation.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Kyle. That means a lot coming from you.
No, absolutely. So, Javon, what are some specific examples where you think emotional intelligence significantly transformed a team or organization that you were working with? And what were some of the key factors that you think that led to that transformation?
Absolutely. One of the ones that come into play right now, they were in the energy sector. And it was a specific team who did like project management. They went and made sure everything was set up, the projects, they got the contract signed, etc. But what was happening was things weren't going the way they were supposed to be. They were missing deadlines. Team members were quitting. Their retention rate was just being hurt, and the engagement didn't seem right, or the productivity. So what we did was I came in. At first, I did a workshop with them. And the workshop was really designed around emotional intelligence quotient 2.0. And really what I was looking at is I wanted to see not what they saw for themselves, but how they saw their teammates. How did they see their team? Did they feel supported? Did they feel heard? Did they feel seen? Did they feel valued? And they didn't feel any of that, and that's really where the catalyst was, where they was just starting to come to work just to get the paycheck. But what that meant was being disengaged, you make more mistakes. So we went and we redid the policies. We made sure the guidelines also reflected emotional intelligence and empathy. We really, really established one-on-ones between leadership and their teams and their people, because they didn't do that. It was geographically dispersed, so we had to identify ways to make it so even the remote folks were heard and understood. Because a lot of times when you have a hybrid environment, the people in the building when they have something they need to do. So we had to change all of that, and we had to tell the leaders, hey, those one-on-ones, that's actually a very important meeting with a very important person. You only move those. That's not the first thing you move off your calendar if you have something else come up, because what's happening is your people, you're losing them. So we went in and we just did a cultural transformation, one thing at a time, and now they're crushing it. They just hit, what is this, 2024? In 2023, I went to them. Their first half of this year has been one of their best halves ever. So that's the transformation that taking care of your people makes.
Well, and the critical part here is too, and you and I both know this, but there's always skeptics out there. We're not talking about things that are nice to have or that they're feel good to have. What you're pointing to is bottom line results that are impacted and influenced through the focus on being effective with emotional intelligence as leaders.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. A lot of people think it's fluff. They say, oh, that's soft and squishy. No, it's foundational. That's why I don't even call it a soft skill. I call it foundational, because without it, we're seeing what's taking place now in corporate spaces. People are leaving. They rather try to work 18, 19 hours on their own thing than be in these companies because they're not being taken care of.
Yeah. Well, we know that to be a fact. Now, Javon, with the last minute or so that we've got, I'm going to ask you a big question and just a little bit of time to answer it. But how do you see the role of emotional intelligence continuing to evolve in the future of work? And what do you think are some of the trends that we're going to see coming up in the near future?
Yeah, I think with the boon of AI, everyone's talking about it. Most people just talk about Gen AI, but AI as a whole, we're going to come to realize that there's certain things that the human aspect is really the most important thing. It's not the technology, it's not the processes. We're going to realize that we cannot do this without the people. And companies are already starting to see that.
Well, folks, you've been listening to Javon Wooden. Javon is a world-renowned expert as it relates to emotional intelligence. He's worked with a lot of organizations and a lot of teams around this topic. And as we talked about a little bit tonight, he's generated some strong results for teams. So, Javon, really appreciate you being on tonight and sharing some of your wisdom. If you want to put a plug in for your website or your book, please do that. But otherwise, thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, HR Kyle. This has been an amazing conversation. I love the work you're doing. If anyone wants to connect with me, they can go to javonwooden.com.
Awesome. Javon, thank you again. And folks listening out there, thank you as well, as always, for joining us every week and being loyal listeners. We certainly appreciate it. We hope that you will like this episode and you'll follow us if you're not, because that's the easiest way to keep track of what's coming up next. Otherwise, I certainly want to thank you for tuning in, and I'll leave you with this. Just be sure to be focused, be grounded, and of course, stay tuned. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of the HR Kyle podcast. We hope you found our discussion valuable and filled with insights that you can apply in your professional journey. Whether you're a business leader aiming to foster a thriving workplace or a job seeker looking to carve out your own path, remember that HR Kyle is the compass that can guide you towards success. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share it with your network. We're committed to being your trusted source for HR wisdom, and we look forward to having you back with us for our next episode. Remember, in the world of HR and professional growth, there's always room for progress. Be sure to visit our website at hrkyle.com. That's hrkyle.com to learn more about how we can help you meet your business and professional goals. So until next time, this is HR Kyle signing off. Stay motivated, stay informed, and keep reaching for those clear goals. Music provided by bensound.com. That's bensound.com.